For decades, a massive industry has revolved around weight loss. The search for the magic pill has included snake oil supplements, fad diets, biohacks, bro science fat burners. Nothing has delivered on its lofty promises until now. The magic pill is upon us, and the fitness industry may change forever.
I have been waiting for this for a long time, for years, actually. We'll talk about that more later, but it's not sensationalist, it's true. Let's go on.
The magic pill comes in the form of GLP-1 receptor agonists. The most popular form of that is currently semaglutide. It's available under the brand names Ozempic and Wegovy.
And there's also other ones like tirzepatide. I think that one goes by the brand name Mounjaro, but long story short, yeah, it's a new brand, or I should say new brands of weight loss drugs.
In this video, I'll review what everyone that wants to lose weight needs to know about these new miracle weight loss drugs based on the scientific consensus.
And this is where it gets interesting because science can get hasty with things, and that's why I've been wanting to wait for so long to present this. So I'm glad somebody else is talking about it so I can piggyback off of them rather than it being something where, let's just say it could be a little bit contentious in my particular field.
The drug has the same effect as the hormone in our intestines, just like injecting testosterone is the same effect as the testosterone that's produced by our own body.
Yeah, and that's where what you have to understand about these drugs is, no, they are not natural, but it mimics something within our bodies, which means that essentially you're going to need to keep using it if you want to continue to have the effects. It's not something that cures something, it's something that's additive.
The effects of GLP-1 are to release insulin, to inhibit the release of glucagon, to suppress gastric emptying, meaning it slows down the rate at which food leaves your stomach. It reduces your appetite, makes you feel more full, makes you eat less.
And this is the thing I've always found interesting about these drugs is a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, I couldn't lose weight when I restricted my calories. I tried all this stuff and it wouldn't work. And then I took these GLP-1 agonists. Well, they don't say that because they don't understand the terminology. But then I took Ozempic and it worked. It's like, that's literally a way of reducing the calories coming in. That is how this works. That is the mechanism behind how this works. It keeps you from eating as much and therefore you lose weight.
These drugs really work. Most people lose around 10% of their body weight over the span of approximately 6 months when they start taking these drugs.
Important thing to note, though, if you take a look here, I think a lot of people will go in there thinking, oh, it's going to lose 10% of my body weight in 6 months, and then another 10% after another 6 months. But what happens is it actually levels off. So don't think that you're going to take this and all of a sudden your weight loss is just going to be this steady decline all the way till you get to your goal weight. These drugs don't work like that.
That makes these drugs the most effective weight loss treatment currently available on the planet, other than bariatric surgery and, actually going to the gym and dieting.
And that's the other thing that's interesting. The reason it's the most effective is because it requires you to change the least. So anytime you tell somebody that they need to diet, exercise, that requires an actual action from that individual. This is something that you can take, literally change nothing about your lifestyle, and it will automatically cause you to do something, which is to eat less. And you won't have to think about it. It'll just happen automatically, which sounds great, but it means, well, we'll get into that in a bit.
These drugs are also very safe. The rate of serious adverse side effects is very low. Most people experience significant health improvements in most of their health biomarkers and their quality of life because the positive effects of the weight loss completely overshadow any negative effects of the drugs.
And that's part of the reason why I wanted to wait to talk about this. I was offered an opportunity very early on, 2021, I believe, to get involved with this company that was trying to make these weight loss drugs more accessible to people. And I held off at that time because I said, you know what? The literature looks like it's trending in a positive way, but I want to make sure that we've seen some more data, that we've had more people on it, that it's been out for longer so we can see whether the studies are just hiding some of these really, really negative side effects that people will start getting as soon as it gets released to the public, or I should say as it becomes more available to the public. And as I've watched it over time, I've become more rather than less confident in it. And that was one of the things that caused me to hold off on making a video on this topic for a long time.
Turns out that GLP-1 agonists are not without problems. There are in fact 5 very serious problems with their use.
But of course, we do need to talk about the negatives. You can't have something that works really well without having some level of side effects. And it's the same thing when it comes to steroids. A lot of times people are like, oh, well, steroids increase muscle mass, and they're really, really effective. It's like, well, okay, if it's going to be really, really effective in one area, it probably means it's going to come along some pretty negative side effects. Creatine, for example, it's effective, but it's not going to put on 10, 20, 30 pounds of lean muscle onto you. And because of the fact that it's not having such a significant impact on your system, it's probably not going to come alongside as serious of adverse effects as something that's going to put on 40 pounds of lean tissue over the course of your lifetime. So let's talk about what the negatives are.
By relying purely on appetite suppression rather than sustainable lifestyle change and healthier food choices for your weight loss, is that you exacerbate any nutritional deficiencies that you may have.
Typically, people who are obese, struggling with obesity, a big part of that reason is because they're eating foods that aren't the best for them. They're eating a lot of very low nutrient density foods, and these foods are much easier to overeat on. So if they continue to eat those foods while they're on these drugs, what's going to happen is if they're not getting enough magnesium, potassium, zinc, iron, whatever else you would be getting from more nutrient-dense foods, all of those deficiencies that they currently have or that they're dealing with are going to become even worse when they're on these drugs. So that is why, even if you do decide to take these, you really should be looking at your overall diet and being really hyper-specific on what foods you're eating while taking these.
The second major problem of using GLP-1 agonists to lose weight is that lean body mass loss is very significant. In many of these trials, people lose a third or up to 40% of their weight from lean body mass.
And that's another thing that basically is just a continuation of what we were talking about, because a lot of people who struggle with obesity are not getting enough protein. Or at least they're not getting enough protein relative to their other calories. So if they just continue to eat less, they're going to get a lot of carbs, a lot of fat, but then they're going to really lower their protein amount. And because they're lowering their protein amount a lot, they're not really going to be able to repair the tissue the way that they need to or have muscle protein synthesis going the way that they need to. So if you have a low protein diet on top of rapid weight loss, you can expect to lose a pretty good amount of lean mass.
Not that GLP-1 agonists inherently cause muscle loss, it's just a combination of the weight loss that they produce with generally a poor diet that results in lean body mass loss.
And I agree. I think that this is the main cause, but I do want to know if they do some studies where they say, okay, we're going to put people on these GLP-1s and we're going to make sure that they eat enough protein while on these GLP-1s. Is there any other mechanism of action that could cause muscle loss? Not that we know of. But to say outright that it doesn't, we don't know that for sure, but I don't think there's anything to suggest that it does. So I do agree with him on this.
Third problem with GLP-1 receptor agonists is that they're very expensive.
Yeah, and that's going to be something where if your insurance doesn't cover it, if you're paying out of pocket, I actually had no idea how expensive they were until I started diving into it. I just assumed it would be similar to a lot of substances that you get. It's not. It's very expensive. You could be looking at like $1,000 a month, which I mean, $12,000 a year for what it's doing could be worth it for some people, but for others who are just like, hey, I just want to stay lean, yeah, I don't know if that's worth it.
Problem 4 is that while these drugs are safe, they are not free from side effects, usually ranging from things like nausea, heartburn, diarrhea, and constipation, to sometimes more serious issues, but usually they are relatively low grade.
Yeah, and you can't stop these issues from happening. You can minimize, but you can't stop it completely because a lot of these issues are a direct result of what the drug is doing. It's not like some interaction of it with something else. And no, it is quite literally trying to keep you from eating too much. It's slowing your gastric emptying, so the acid reflux or indigestion that you're experiencing is actually a direct result of the drug itself. So trying to make it completely free of these side effects would be quite tough, but in the end, pretty much anything that is very effective is going to have some side effects. But most of it seems to be gastrointestinal. I don't see there being a ton of adverse effects outside of that, other than obviously what we already talked about, lean muscle mass loss. But when it comes down to it, the effects that you're going to get in your digestion are a direct result of the drugs themselves.
Problem number 5 is that if you stop using these drugs, you stop reaping the benefits. And most people, when they go off these drugs, they regain all of the weight that they lost slowly over time.
And this is what I was trying to tell you guys before about the fact that you're not just going to continue to lose weight on these, it's going to level out because it's completely based off of hunger. So if you haven't actually implemented any changes in your habits, if you're not doing more activity, if you're not eating lower calorie foods, like trying to do things that could actively work if you weren't on these drugs, you're going to level out as your hunger levels out. But then you stop taking these drugs, your hunger hormones, they increase, and then you gain the weight back. So especially when it comes from a cost perspective that we were talking about before, where it can be extremely expensive, if you're going to take this and stay on it for the rest of your life, be prepared to pay a lot of money to do so. It's just one of those things where you have to really analyze your motives for taking it.
If you're not changing your lifestyle, you're not making smarter food choices, and you're just relying on the drug to eat less of the same foods that you're currently eating, what happens when you stop taking the drug? Your appetite goes back to normal, your food intake increases, and you will reach an equilibrium at the same weight that you were at before you started taking the drug.
Exactly.
So sustainable lifestyle change and making different food choices, exercising, these things are still important for long-term weight loss success, unless you plan on using the drug for life.
And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because if you're a person who is willing to do all these lifestyle changes, the chances that you would 100% need the drug are a lot lower. Now, where I think it could be useful is kickstarting things, right? So you lower your appetite a little bit, just so, I know a lot of people use this term and kind of, it can be annoying from time to time, but the food noise where you're just constantly thinking about food, if you're not constantly thinking about it, but you're willing to meal prep, you're willing to make things ahead of time, make sure that you have nutritious options available to you, but you're not constantly thinking about food, I think in that way it could be helpful. But if you're just going to use it as a crutch, really bad mentality to have for it.
In this sense, these weight loss drugs are very similar to anabolic steroids. Using anabolic steroids without exercising will put some muscle on you, but if you stop using the drugs, you lose the muscle mass. Similarly, if you don't change your lifestyle and you use these weight loss drugs, you're going to regain the weight after you stop using them.
Yep, it really is as simple as that. You can go on growth hormone tests, Primo, all these other things, and if you don't work out, you probably actually would still get a growth stimulus out of it. But if you don't continue to build upon that, then you come off those things, that stimulus is gone, it's going to come back down.
So ironically, while these drugs were originally designed for overweight individuals and people with diabetes, there's actually an argument to be made that these drugs are more suitable for bodybuilders preparing for a contest, because that's inherently an unsustainable practice.
This is the one where I'm not sure yet. I understand the arguments for it. I understand it's, well, they're really just using this in order to get stage lean. They're not doing this for health. It's just to get rid of some of that, like we talked about before, food noise, just to make sure they can stay on their diet until they get to stage. I'm very hesitant on this because of the fact that bodybuilding is very extreme to begin with. You're getting incredibly lean, incredibly diced, and it is just not healthy in and of itself. So think about those people who are pushing their bodies to the limit, and eventually their brain fights back, right? Their brain fights back, and they'll probably binge at some point or another to keep themselves from going too far. This could allow people to theoretically push themselves past what they would have been mentally capable of doing before. And I could definitely see some dangers in people trying to cut too quickly and not having the proper fight back hormonally in order to make sure that they don't go too far into that realm. I mean, it already can be dangerous to starve yourself to lead into show, and I feel like these drugs could allow people to starve themselves even faster. So I'm very hesitant on it, but I do understand what he's saying.
So then you might as well do it with less hunger. Of course, a strong argument can be made that just like using anabolic steroids for muscle growth is cheating, so can it be called cheating to use these weight loss drugs to lose fat, at least for something like a bodybuilding show?
That I don't completely agree with, because it wouldn't be cheating unless you were competing in a natural organization, because it is banned. These types of things are banned in natural organizations. But in open bodybuilding that's not tested, they can use whatever they want. Like whatever is going to give them the advantage, they use it. So using Ozempic would not be cheating. Not in those cases, but in natural bodybuilding, yeah, that argument makes a lot more sense.
This unsustainability of using the drug itself purely for the weight loss makes them a complete band-aid solution. Of course, it's still better to lose weight at least periodically than to be overweight all the time.
I never really thought about it that way before, because I'd always thought, okay, well, if you're going to lose the weight just to bounce back up, what's the point? That was kind of my thinking of it. But I can understand what he's saying because health markers do improve when you lose weight. So if your health markers improve for a short period of time, even if you go back to where you were before, that might be a little bit healthier than just constantly being at that higher weight. Something I'd never thought about before. I thought that was really interesting that he brought that up, but it is something to think about.
I would strongly advise people to really consider the long-term effects and think of the long-term future. Do you plan on using these drugs for life? Are you okay with the level of side effects and the possible economical costs? And importantly, are you going to change your lifestyle? Without sustainable lifestyle change, you're not going to reach optimal health, and you're going to have to stay on these drugs essentially for life to stay lean.
Yeah. And this is where we kind of come to a head and we take a look at the broader picture. So you have to understand if this is something that you're going to take. Is it something you're willing to pay for a long period of time? Or at least is it something that you're using just to give you a kickstart? That way you don't have to be on it long term. Are you just using it to get rid of a little bit of hunger while you change your sustainability habits? If this is not something that you are willing to take in a smart, measured manner, and you're just using it as this Band-Aid, this crutch, I do not advise it for anybody. But I do think there are some people who are really struggling who could definitely use this. If you're able to get more ultra-processed foods out of your diet, fantastic. If you're able to take and say, okay, I'm going to be consistent in tracking my calories, my macros, taking a look at the micronutrients I'm getting, fantastic. I want all of those steps to be taken before people start to go towards weight loss drugs. The problem is a lot of people are going to use these weight loss drugs in lieu of those other things rather than doing it alongside of it. But I do think these can be very helpful for some people that are just struggling, that are just mentally being bombarded with their hunger because they've completely destroyed their leptin and ghrelin signaling. And so they're just thinking about food all the time. And it's like it's taking over their life. And it's just, I think it could be very useful for people like that. So I did want to say I do have a company that I work with pretty closely. They're called Transcend HRT. They do provide some of these drugs. So if that's something that you're interested in looking into, if you're somebody who's really struggling, you are working towards changing your lifestyle habits, and this is something that can help you along that journey, I do think it's worth looking into. But if you're somebody who's just like, you know what, I want to eat all the junk that I feel like eating, so I'm just going to take and eat a bad diet, use this to curb my appetite, best of both worlds. No, terrible mentality. Do not look into it if that is your mentality. But if you're somebody who is truly struggling, you have obesity, morbid obesity, somebody in your family is really struggling, but you can see that they're actively trying to make lifestyle changes and you're trying to help them, maybe it is something you consider looking into. But do not expect a miracle. Like we talked about, 10% of weight loss happens, but then it levels out unless you actually have something that's going to change to keep that going for the long term. This is not something that is going to get you down to stage leanness without you trying to make changes to your overall lifestyle. So don't think that you're just going to take this and get shredded without thought. You do need to actually take and see this as a health outcome medication rather than being something that is just going to make me pretty while being able to eat the junk that I want. So great video from Menno. And if you guys haven't checked them out already, they also offer other things. They offer HRT, peptide therapy, things that I can't take as a natural. So if that's something that you're interested in because you don't compete in natural organizations or anything like that, that is something that they offer. I think they're a great service, and that's why I partnered with them. But I hope you guys can benefit something from it, and I hope you benefited from this video, even if that's not something you're interested in looking into. TNF out. Good? Sorry.